Alright, y'all, so today I want to do a very quick review of Batman Year One. Obviously famous. It was written by Frank Miller with art done by David. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that last name, alongside work from other artists. And this came out all the way back in 1987. And it was kind of really perceived as a one-shot comic, but also weirdly in the main DC Universe continuity. It's a little bit weird, and it's only 4 issues long. It's a pretty quick read, and if you don't know about Batman Year One, basically the premise of it is it's basically the first year that Jim Gordon is basically assigned to Gotham City as a new cop, but also more importantly, the first year in somewhat of the origin story for Batman, his first adventures in Gotham City. He's just starting out as a crime fighter, and in a lot of ways, this is just basically an origin story. Now, like I said, if you're at all into Batman comics, you've heard of Batman Year One. It's one of the most famous Batman comics of all time and has inspired so many other artists and writers over the years. It has arguably created the definitive origin for the character over the years. I am absolutely certain that Nolan, when eventually did Batman Begins in 2005, took inspiration from this. Even Tim Burton maybe even took inspiration from this origin story for his film, Batman 89. But, like I said, Frank Miller, I think is one of the most brilliant, best comic book artists, writers of all time. There's no doubt about that. He has written some outstanding, critically acclaimed stories of all time. His Daredevil run's legendary. My favorite work from his of all time is The Dark Knight Returns. I think that's a brilliant comic book. I probably need to review it on the channel, but I really enjoy that graphic novel. It's just brilliant. It's great. Or limited series. And, a year later, he was kind of hot off the success. He wrote this one. He didn't do any of the art. So, like I said, you can arguably say it's not fully a Frank Miller Batman story just because he didn't do the art for it. Which, like I said, a lot of people don't like his art too, to be fair. So there's pros and cons. I really enjoyed this. Now, I don't think it's perfect. I did recently review the animated film, and it's kind of interesting to compare and contrast this with that. I think overall, I will say this: the comic book is way better than the animated film. There's additional details in the comic that are just not present in the film, and I think that's just due to the fact that, it's just a different medium. There's like additional lines of dialogue, things that Jim Gordon is thinking in his head that are kind of presented as thought dialogue boxes and to the reader that just, like I said, can't exactly be presented to the medium of film. And like I said, a lot of the critical acclaim for this book is deserved. I recently read it for the first time, and I think it's a pretty good book. Now, I still think there's a lot of problems with it. I personally don't think it comes together quite as nicely as The Dark Knight Returns in terms of themes. I just think in general that's a more interesting Batman story. But, like I said, there's a lot of things about this origin story that are pretty core and central to the character. This sense of doing the right thing and the sort of obsession with bats and how he becomes a crime fighter is pretty interesting. I like seeing Bruce Wayne's adventures initially trying out different things and tactics in the world of Gotham and kind of preparing himself. Now, we obviously don't get to see any of the League of Assassins or any of the training he did around the world. It's a story that takes place after that, but it's all really interesting stuff. Jim Gordon is pretty interesting here. He's the primary focus of this book. He's kind of the character. He's kind of the main character in a lot of ways. But, like I said, he gets introduced to Gotham, the sort of corrupt nature of it all. And, we get to see him. We get to see a really brutalist look at him because we also get a little bit part of the story where he cheats on his wife. So I guess nobody's perfect. But I really enjoyed his story. I think it was pretty good. It was engaging. The art's also really well done in this comic. It's really well done. It's well inked. The colors are very interesting. It's very clear cut. It kind of have this neo decor kind of art deco kind of look to it, which I think makes sense for Gotham. Gotham in general always has that deco look established for it, which I've always really liked. I like a lot of the story beats. I like how Batman becomes Batman here. I like how Gordon eventually becomes the man he becomes. There's some leaps in logic here that I still think are weird. Now, in the movie, it's less clear because it really seems weird. Like, he kind of just makes the assumption that, oh, Batman's a good guy, and that's the end. Now, it ends abruptly, just like the animated movie. But what makes the comic better is there's additional lines of dialogue that Gordon says and thinks to himself that makes the reader, and we also understand his point of view more of why he eventually sides with Batman and learns that he's a force for good. Which is, a lot of those features are kind of not really in the animated movie. So, as like I said before, I think that this is obviously the best adaptation of the story. I mean, it was the original one. But I still think the story ends too abruptly. I still don't quite like how it ends. Like, we get to the point that, Gordon's on top of the roof, and they obviously name drop the Joker, and then he's like basically teasing that he's going to meet with Batman. I don't really quite like that. I feel, like I said before, it feels a little bit too rushed, but it feels much more believable in the comic. The action's very good. The panels are very well thought out. It's a very nicely designed comic book. Everything's well illustrated. When there's action, the action is really well done. The sort of abandoned building where the Gotham SWAT team rushes in with Brandon leading them, trying to kill Batman. Really intense scene in both adaptations, and obviously a highlight of the comic. Selena Kyle's here. She kind of takes a back seat in the story, and I kind of wish, there was more to her. The only real big criticism is that this is like only a 4-issue series, and I guess technically there was continuations of this, but I wish that Miller would have written a full run of this series. Like, I think this would have been a great series, potentially, like, an even better than it already is, if, it was expanded upon, that we would get more interesting moments, more developments for characters, just in general, more development of the universe. But what's here is pretty damn good. I like how Gotham's established. I like how Gordon, we see the story. Some of my flaws are still there. Like, I don't like the fact that Batman takes a sidestep to his story. A lot of the same issues are there. I do wish there was more Batman in the story. I wish there was more moments we get to see him train as a vigilante. In general, I just think they're showing a much more focused attention on Batman. But regardless, it doesn't, like I said, destroy. Like, I still think this is a good Batman comic. I just don't think it's as good as Dark Knight Returns and, frankly, some other Batman stories I've read. But regardless, I do get why, the hype is deserved. There's a lot of great story beats, a lot of great things that were established in the origin story for Batman here. Just big cons. I wish, Batman was more of a focus here, and some other elements were more fleshed out, and obviously maybe if this was expanded to a full run. But yeah, my thoughts on Batman Year 1 from 1987, written by Frank Miller. Pretty good comic book. I definitely recommend it. But yeah, hopefully you all have a good day and peace, y'all.